700 WLW.
Billy Cunningham, News Radio 700. Brian Bouffard is a former Navy lieutenant commander and JAG officer, Judge Advocates Corps, who defends military members in courts martial all across America and the world. And Brian Bouffard, welcome to the Bill Cunningham Show. Brian, how are you?
Bill, thanks for having me. Doing great.
I got you on to talk about the situations with Bowe Bergdahl, whether or not charges are going to be filed. I've seen, as you've seen, I'm sure, the interviews of his brothers in arms. Fox has a lot of them on. CNN puts them on. Time Magazine has put them on, a edition out this week. First of all, what's your impression as a former military? Put your lawyer hat to the side for the moment. What is your impression of the available evidence we have about the service of Bowe Bergdahl? Do you think it's been with honor and distinction?
It doesn't appear so. I think the quality of the evidence that's out there is really very good. And when I say that, I'm not talking about anything that politicians say. I'm not talking about anything that comes out of the White House or DOD or Congress. But what we do have is actual testimony from people who knew him in 2009 on the ground and can tell us, and we're learning more every day about what they knew and what they saw there at the time, and that's really what matters.
What matters when you're in court, eyewitnesses, when you got 8 or 9 or 10, and I think of the 29 or 30, probably 20 or 22 have spoken out. It's pretty clear he planned this, whether it's an unauthorized leave or a desertion. He knew what he was doing. He sent home his stuff. He seemed to want to communicate with the Taliban. He was looking for somebody in one of those villages the night or morning he walked away to speak the English so he could communicate with the Taliban. Isn't this awfully powerful evidence?
To me, it's extremely powerful. Now, obviously he's innocent until proven guilty. They haven't even made a decision probably even to start a criminal investigation yet, but they certainly haven't made a decision to refer his case to a trial. I haven't heard really anything to credibly suggest to me that he was, captured involuntarily or behaved in an honorable way with this. It seems that he pretty clearly left his unit without authorization, and if they can prove that he had the intent to remain away permanently, then they can prove desertion, and that could potentially carry a death sentence.
Well, let's talk about the differences between unauthorized absence on one hand and desertion on the other. What are each?
Sure. Unauthorized absence is very, very common. I mean, you might think of, somebody who's supposed to be at a formation on Saturday morning. Instead, he leaves and spends the weekend doing what he wants to do and then comes back on Monday. He wasn't where he was supposed to be. He's unauthorized absent, but he came back of his own free will, and he never intended to stay away permanently. You contrast that with desertion, which obviously desertion can take place either in a time of war or not, but the fact that it's in a time of war makes it incredibly much more serious, and all the government would have to prove is that when he left, he had the intent to remain away permanently. So we look at some of this evidence that's coming out from his fellow soldiers there where he put his arms down and left his gear and just kind of went out there and may have even made statements indicating that he is not happy with being a part of the American Army and wants to go do whatever in a war zone. I mean, it's bad news.
So let's say somebody at Fort Hood or Fort Knox or Fort Dix, they're a soldier, they're supposed to have guard duty Saturday morning, they're here in the country, they go out Friday night, get drunk, hook up with some sexy blonde, and come back to the base on Monday. That sounds like unauthorized leave. What's the penalty for that?
Well, unauthorized leave or unauthorized absence, or AWOL as it's known in the Army, it can carry a fairly significant punishment, but typically it's handled more along the lines of what we might think of as a misdemeanor in the civilian world. It's something that they want to deal with, and it's something that doesn't look good on your record for sure, but it's not going to be the kind of career or life-ending situation probably that Sergeant Bergdahl may be facing.
So you may do like kitchen duty, you may have to march around, you might go to jail for 30 days, something like that?
Yeah, and you might not even be prosecuted at all. It might be handled non-judicially by your commander with a good old-fashioned butt cheek.
All right, now let's say you're at an Army outpost in eastern Afghanistan up against Pakistan. There's 29 or 30 of you. You're in an area, a base, which is a forward base with literally barbed wire strung between Humvees and other armored vehicles. It is your job at night to guard, to be the sentry, as the other ones try to catch some sleep, generally inside the vehicles or on the ground. And that person walks away, let's say first unauthorized leave. Let's say they met up with some village female and they wanted to go out there and have some fun with her, and they came back at Saturday 14 hours later, what would happen to that person?
Well, it's going to be obviously handled a lot more seriously. You typically, I'm not going to say that it never happens, but you typically don't see people leaving their units in a war zone. I mean, there's no place to go. It's not like he's in Southern California, you know, at Camp Pendleton or the naval station and goes down to Tijuana. There's really nothing going on that you need to be doing in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. I mean, that's just crazy.
It's not like you're going to go to Tijuana to tie one on with tequila and some Mexican chick. It doesn't work that way in Afghanistan.
No, it doesn't. And you also, you know, what you just pointed out raises something else that I think is pretty important, and that is everybody's just talking about desertion. But if you look a little deeper, at least at the state of the evidence that appears to be coming out from people who knew him, I think that there's a very good chance that military prosecutors could credibly charge him with a couple of other articles, both of which are also extremely serious.
Such as?
One of which is Article 99. It's called misbehavior before the enemy, and it includes such actions as casting away your weapons. There's also Article 104, aiding the enemy. He apparently expressed these views. He leaves. He is either captured by or encounters the Taliban. Now, he's just a PFC at this point, and it's not like he has, you know, high-level state secrets, but could he potentially tell an insurgent enemy about the layout of that forward operating base and where the weak points are? Absolutely, he could.
So in this case, the available evidence from his brothers in arms in the platoon is that he was awkward, he was a bit weird. He talked to them about putting down his arms and walking to India. He also sent all of his stuff home. On the night in question, he left his breastplate, he left his rifle, and walked to a village in which, according to available evidence, he spoke to villagers about connecting up with the Taliban. Now, assuming those facts are true, if he was the sentry in a forward base where soldiers are being killed, and he left his post to hook up with the Taliban, what's that called?
If you take all of those facts, if they are facts, if you take them into account, that is very, very good evidence that he had the intent to remain away permanently. That's what would up this thing from unauthorized absence to desertion. And then, of course, you add in the fact that it's a time of war. You add in the fact that it's actually in a war zone. And certainly you add in the fact that they sent people looking for him, and some of those people lost their lives. So all of these things are going to play into, or should play into, the decision of whether or not he's going to be charged, whether or not he's going to be prosecuted.
It's going to be hard to prove some of the charges that these 6 soldiers were killed or more, because it is clear they would not have been in the position they were in to be killed but for the actions of Bowe Bergdahl. They were there because they were looking for him, but on the other hand, they might have been killed anyway. So can that really be proven?
Well, the way that would play out would be probably not in the guilt or innocence phase of whether or not he committed a crime. I think the way that aspect of this is going to be significant is if he is charged, prosecuted, and then convicted, he's going to face a sentencing hearing. And to me, that's pretty powerful aggravating evidence of a desertion that under these circumstances, you know, he had to know at the time that the Army would send people looking for him. And if they can even suggest that some of those people were injured or killed because of that, that's something that can be properly considered by a sentencing authority.
One thing that came to my mind, Brian Bouffard, was the issue of insanity. I cannot imagine the mentality of a soldier in a forward base in Afghanistan where the enemy is everywhere, that he leaves his gun and to an infantryman to leave your rifle and to leave your breastplate and then to walk away without a way to protect yourself. Has anyone thought of insanity? Does that work in the military?
It absolutely can if the facts are there. Now bear in mind, an insanity defense would require some sort of evidence, you know, good evidence, that if he had a mental disease or a defect, that he had it in 2009 when he left. In other words, you know, he's been gone now for 5 years. If he committed an offense, that offense was over as soon as he, you know, as soon as he left or as soon as he gave information to the enemy, if that's what he did. I can't imagine what it would be like to be a POW for 5 years. Did they torture him? Maybe so.
Probably.
If he has any level of mental issue now as a result of his capture, I think that's something that also could be considered in sentencing in his favor.
So it's like it's like in a capital case, there's aggravating circumstances and lessening circumstances, and the fact that he might have had mental health issues which seemingly in the record no one's brought up yet. But assuming that's the case, because can you imagine a father getting an email? And is the fact that he said rotten, lousy things in emails to his dad about the Army, about his fellow soldiers, and about America, does that play into it, good or bad?
I think so. I mean, anything he said or did can play into this. And my take on it is not so much that it indicates insanity on his part, but that it indicates, if he sent those emails and if he held those views, that tells us what was in his mind when he decided to leave. And if this was a situation where he might have been trying to defect to the Taliban, I mean, it's hard to imagine, but it's certainly possible, and that would certainly aggravate what he may be facing.
Because we have evidence today he played badminton with the Taliban, he played soccer with the Taliban, he had target practice with AK-47s with the Taliban. There's available evidence now he converted to being a Muslim and a Mujahideen warrior. What about that?
It's not looking good. I mean, those are obviously terrible facts when you imagine him sitting in his own court-martial facing a panel of senior officer members as his jury.
What's the possible penalty for desertion?
Under these circumstances, if they refer it as a capital case, he could get the death penalty. The other articles that I mentioned as well, the misbehavior before the enemy and aiding the enemy, if they can prove that, those offenses also in time of war can carry a death penalty. So it doesn't get any more serious than this.
Assuming he doesn't get the death penalty, I think with Obama in the White House, that's almost impossible. But could he face 20, 30 years in jail?
He could face up to life without parole.
Life without parole? Oh.
For a case of, let's just say desertion right now. Desertion in time of war.
Yeah.
The range of punishment is literally from no punishment at all the way up to death row and execution. So there is no wider range than what he faces. So
as we speak, he's in Landstuhl, Germany. Is it fair to say he may be there and in military custody the rest of his life?
He's not going to be in Germany the rest of his life. I mean, ultimately, he'll be back here in the States. Right now, undoubtedly, he's being debriefed. If he's got medical issues, obviously they're being attended to as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if investigators at this point, once they get some information from him, start re-interviewing all the people back in 2009 and all these his fellow soldiers who have this information that I think is extremely important. Has he seen a lawyer? I don't know. I doubt it. I think that's going to hurt him as well.
Well, as an attorney, former lieutenant commander and JAG officer, if you're contacted by Bowe Bergdahl's family, do you tell him at this point to shut the hell up?
Well, yeah, I do. I think the comments that have come out from his father are not helpful to him.
No,
I think they're not helpful to him at all.
No. And I guess as an American, you're also an American, to have the president in the Rose Garden with his father who said to him, follow your conscience, which is like you have permission to leave in those emails. He is speaking Pashto, or a dialect of Arabs used by the terrorist. His physical appearance is that of a Muslim Mujahideen warrior himself. He speaks the language. And I'm thinking, because we all knew ahead of time, because of the Rolling Stone article of some 4 years ago, what was coming politically. This isn't your bailiwick, but didn't it look bad that this wasn't Audie Murphy? That this was not someone who going to get the Congressional Medal of Honor? Would you have traded a deserting PFC for 5 4-star generals of the Taliban? I'm glad I didn't have to make that choice. But when I first heard about this and saw all this and realized what the trade had been, my first thought was, I am not a combat veteran, but I know and have many friends who are. And we have sent a very powerful message to our enemy that if you capture one of our guys, you're going to be able to get 5 of your guys back. Or more.
And I think that's a terrible, or more, exactly. I think that's a terrible message to send, and I think that puts our troops at more risk.
Of course it does. In the good old days, after the Civil War, the war was over. World War II, the war's over. World War I, it's over. Vietnam, it's over. We've never released prisoners of war who are criminals, who are war criminals, while the war is still going on. These other, of course you exchange prisoners at the end of war. But in this conflict, hell, it's still going on, and we've sent back their generals to compete against us. But look, Brian Bouffard, I got to run. Do you have a website, or anyway, if somebody wants to get a hold of you for military purposes?
Please find me at www.jagdefender.com. I'd be happy to talk to anybody who needs my help.
Brian Bouffard, thanks for your service to this country, and you're a great American.
Bill, thank you so much. Take care.
God bless America.